Imagine the treaty that ended World War One. You probably picture generals drawing borders, right? Or politicians calculating war reparations.
Yeah, exactly. Diplomats basically carving up the map of Europe in a closed room.
Right. But what if I told you that their most radical legacy was actually about, like, your 9 to 5 job? Welcome to the deep dive. Today, our mission is to decode a stack of century old blueprints.
And these aren't just any blueprints. We are analyzing the foundational documents of the International Labor Organization, the ILO.
Yeah, we're taking the original 1919 Constitution, looking at its major 1944 update, and trying to figure out how a group of diplomats engineered this architectural framework for global labor rights, because it still dictates the modern working world you navigate every single day.
It really is a massive pivot in modern diplomatic history. I mean, you have these victorious powers in 1919, right, and the Treaty of Versailles,
Right.
and they're surveying a completely devastated continent. But embedded right there in the original preamble of the ILO Constitution is this incredibly bold
To
thesis.
1919, yeah.
Right, for 1919. They declared that universal and lasting peace can only be established if it is based upon social justice.
Which is wild to think about. The architects of a post-World War peace treaty were explicitly linking geopolitical stability to, like, how a factory owner treats an assembly line worker.
Exactly.
But to understand why those two things were so deeply tied together in their minds, we really have to look at the landscape they were staring at. I mean, the world was industrializing at a breakneck
Oh,
pace.
absolutely. And the human cost had reached a breaking point by then.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the preamble we are looking at doesn't speak in abstract diplomatic platitudes. It lists out the urgent, desperate problems they were trying to fix.
Yeah, it's highly specific. They are calling for the regulation of working hours. They demand the prevention of unemployment and the provision of an adequate living wage.
Right, and they explicitly mandate the protection of workers against sickness, disease, and injury arising out of employment.
I mean, it reads like a very progressive, modern political platform.
Yeah, but they were laying this out over 100 years ago. They also call for the protection of children, young persons, and women. And they lay down the principles of equal remuneration for work of equal value, which basically means equal pay.
Right. And they demand the recognition of the principle of freedom of association. So, unions.
But what elevates this document beyond just, a simple moral wish list? Because we've seen those before.
Well, it's the sharp economic rationale built right into the text. The founders understood the mechanics of global trade.
Okay, how so?
There is this highly pragmatic sentence in the preamble. It states, and I'll quote it, "The failure of any nation to adopt humane conditions of labor is an obstacle in the way of other nations which desire to improve the conditions in their own countries."
Oh, I see. It's like the ultimate global group project where one person's refusal to follow the rules just drags down the whole team's grade.
Yeah, exactly. But instead of a grade, I mean, we are talking about the entire global economy.
So it's about preventing a global race to the bottom. Like, if country A decides to implement a living wage, ensure safe factories, maybe cap the work week at 40 hours, the cost of manufacturing their goods naturally goes up, right?
Right, exactly.
But if country B decides to rely on child labor, pay pennies, and run 80-hour shifts well, their goods remain incredibly cheap.
And so country A is therefore penalized in the global market for implementing humane policies. Their goods are totally undercut by the exploitative practices of country B. Wow. The founders realized you just cannot sustain domestic social reform if international exploitation constantly threatens your economy.
So the only way to lift the floor for the worker is if every nation lifts it together.
Exactly, which introduces a massive structural dilemma, right?
Yeah, I'd imagine. Because acknowledging economic interdependence is one thing, but a standard room full of politicians isn't going to be able to monitor or enforce this kind of granular factory-level change across the globe.
Right, politicians might sign a piece of paper, but they are pretty detached from the realities of the shop floor.
So they needed an entirely new model of governance.
They did. And the framers solved this by establishing a permanent tripartite structure.
Tripartite, meaning 3 parts.
Yes. And to this day, the ILO is the only international organization that brings together 3 distinct groups to share equal status in decision-making: governments, employers, and workers.
Okay, let's look at the actual math of this structure, specifically in the International Labor Conference, because the text designates that as the supreme deliberative body.
Right. And it meets at least once a year.
Right. So each member state is required to send 4 delegates, You get 2 government delegates, 1 employer's delegate, and 1 worker's delegate.
Yeah, the 2-in-1 formula.
But wait, look at that ratio. If governments get double the representation of the people actually doing the work and running the businesses, aren't they just rigging the system just to maintain the status quo and keep the power in the hands of the state?
Well, you aren't the first to ask that. That ratio was a point of really heavy contention during the drafting process in 1919. But the ultimate decision came down to pure pragmatism. The goal of the ILO is to draft and adopt international conventions that member countries will then take back and integrate into their national legal systems. Right?
Okay.
If governments, the entities that actually hold legislative power and control the national parliaments, if they don't feel they have a dominant, guiding hand in shaping those conventions, they will simply ignore them when they leave Geneva.
I see.
So the 2-on-1 formula ensures that workers and employers have a formalized, undeniable voice on the world stage while keeping governments invested enough to actually ratify the agreements.
Okay, that makes sense. But what really stands out to me is highly unusual is Article 4.
Oh, the voting procedure.
Yeah. These delegates do not vote as a monolithic national bloc. Every single delegate votes individually.
It completely upends traditional international diplomacy.
Right.
I mean, an employer delegate from a particular country can vote entirely differently from their own government's delegates.
That is wild.
And a worker delegate from one nation can align with worker delegates from 20 other nations to outvote a coalition of governments. It completely breaks down the concept of strict national sovereignty within the walls of the conference.
So you essentially have a room where, like, a labor union representative from one side of the world has the exact same voting power on a specific workplace safety measure as the labor minister of an entirely different global superpower.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this tripartite philosophy doesn't just stop at the annual conference. It serves as the circulatory system for the entire organization.
How far down does it go?
Well, it flows right down into the governing body, which acts as the executive council. That body is made up of 56 people, 28 representing governments, 14 representing employers, and 14 representing workers.
Same ratio.
Exactly. And it also dictates the absolute independence of the International Labor Office in Geneva, which is the permanent secretariat. The Constitution explicitly states that the Director General and the staff are forbidden from seeking or receiving instructions from any government or any external authority whatsoever.
So they're completely walled off. They work for the global standard, not the national interest of whatever country they happen to hold a passport from.
Precisely.
Now, this tripartite machinery successfully guided the organization through its early years. But as we move from the 1920s into the 1930s and 40s, the global landscape just fractures.
Yeah, drastically.
The Great Depression ravages the global economy, and the devastation of World War II completely reshapes the world order. So as the war was reaching its final stages, the organization realized it needed to fundamentally reaffirm its purpose for a new, highly volatile era.
Right. They needed to articulate a broader, more profound vision for why social justice was the only path forward. And they did this in 1944 by drafting the Declaration of Philadelphia.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, it was annexed directly to the original Constitution, and it completely redefined the aims and purposes of the ILO.
The very first fundamental principle listed in that 1944 declaration is a phrase that just carries an immense amount of weight. It says, labor is not a commodity.
We really need to pause and examine the philosophical gravity of that statement. Because in classical economic theory, labor is frequently categorized as just another input in the production process.
Yeah, you acquire land, you acquire capital, and you acquire labor.
Exactly. You buy it, you sell it, and the free market dictates the price based on supply and demand.
Right.
Well, the Declaration of Philadelphia directly challenges that framework. It asserts that human effort, human time, and human physical exertion cannot be reduced to a line item on a spreadsheet, traded at the lowest possible market clearing price.
Because if you treat labor purely as a commodity, you get the economic catastrophes of the 1930s.
Precisely.
I mean, if labor is just a commodity, then when a market dips, you slash wages to the absolute bottom to cut costs. But when you do that globally, workers suddenly have no purchasing power.
They can't buy the goods being produced.
Exactly. Consumer demand collapses, factories close, unemployment skyrockets, and you spiral into a Great Depression. The founders were looking at the ruins of World War II and tracing the causal chain back to the desperate economic conditions that allowed authoritarianism to take root in the first place.
They saw the direct link between treating humans as disposable inputs and the collapse of global stability.
Wow.
When you say labor is not a commodity, you reframe the entire economic conversation. You are no longer just negotiating the price of a good, you are negotiating the conditions of a human life.
Yeah.
And they build on this immediately with another foundational principle from the 1944 text.
Yeah.
They declare that poverty anywhere constitutes a danger to prosperity everywhere.
Poverty anywhere constitutes a danger to prosperity everywhere. It really takes the 1919 concept of preventing a race to the bottom and elevates it.
It does.
It's no longer just about protecting the cost of goods. It's a stark warning that extreme inequality breeds instability. Like if a massive segment of the global population is left destitute, the security and prosperity of wealthy nations is basically an illusion.
Exactly. And that text goes on to guarantee that all human beings, irrespective of race, creed, or sex, have the right to pursue both their material well-being and their spiritual development.
Okay, the inclusion of spiritual development in a treaty about labor standards is incredibly revealing to me.
Right. It implies that work shouldn't just be about subsistence. Earning a wage shouldn't require you to surrender your dignity or crush your soul in a dangerous, dehumanizing environment.
It's a holistic view of the worker.
Completely.
But, having a beautiful holistic view of humanity is one thing. Principles are useless without enforcement. So what does this all mean? How did they actually plan to make a sovereign nation listen to them?
Now we have to look at the rulemaking and enforcement machinery built into Chapter 2 of the text.
Let's do it.
The machinery starts with a standard-setting process. When the International Labor Conference decides to adopt a new convention, let's say they want to establish a new global standard on protections against toxic chemicals in manufacturing, it requires a two-thirds majority vote from all those individual delegates we discussed earlier.
And once that convention is adopted in Geneva, it triggers a very specific legal mechanism.
Yes. Member states are obligated by the Constitution to submit that new convention to their own competent national authorities. And they are on a strict ticking clock.
Right. They have precisely 18 months to do it.
Exactly. And the competent national authority is almost always the country's parliament, Congress, or national legislature.
So wait, even if a government's own delegates voted against the convention in Geneva, that government cannot just toss the document in a drawer and pretend it never happened.
Nope. They are legally required to bring it home, put it on the floor of their legislature within 18 months, and formally address it.
Wow.
They have to tell their lawmakers, the international community just adopted this standard. What is our national response going to be?
And what's fascinating here is that they must file subsequent reports detailing their progress or explaining their failure to ratify it.
It is a brilliant mechanism for forcing domestic transparency. It guarantees that international labor standards bypass diplomatic back channels and are forced right into the public legislative light of every member nation.
Okay, but let's put this machinery into the real world, because what happens when a country ratifies a convention, turns it into national law, but then completely ignores it in practice?
That is the big question.
Yeah, so imagine a hypothetical scenario. Let's say country X suddenly passes a domestic law banning all labor unions, which is a direct violation of the Freedom of Association conventions they previously ratified.
Okay.
Walk me through exactly what happens on this enforcement ladder. Who fires the first shot?
Well, the very first rung of the escalation ladder is found in Article 24 of the Constitution. It's called the representations procedure.
Representation. Okay.
In your hypothetical, a national or international workers' union wouldn't have to wait for a sympathetic government to intervene. The union itself can file a formal representation directly to the ILO.
Wow, so officially blowing the whistle and alleging that country X has failed to secure the effective observance of the convention.
Exactly. The non-state actors, so the unions or the employer associations, can totally bypass their own government's court system and trigger an international incident themselves.
That's huge.
It is. Once that representation is filed, the ILO communicates it to the government of country X and invites them to make a statement on the subject.
And if they don't?
If country X ignores the request or provides a deeply unsatisfactory excuse, the governing body has the right to publish the representation and the government's weak response for the entire world to see.
Naming and shaming on a global scale.
Yeah.
But what if country X simply does not care about bad PR, like they just double down on banning the unions?
Then we move to a much more severe step on the ladder, which is covered in Articles 26 through 29, Complaints and Commissions of Inquiry.
That sounds serious.
Oh, it is. A formal complaint can be filed by another member state that has ratified the same convention, or the governing body can initiate it on its own motion. The governing body can then appoint an independent commission of inquiry to thoroughly investigate the situation on the ground in country X.
So this isn't just a diplomatic letter expressing concern. This is an exhaustive, formal investigation.
It is the highest level investigative procedure the organization possesses. The commission gathers evidence, hears from witnesses, and ultimately publishes a comprehensive report detailing its findings.
And laying out specific recommendations that Country X must take to fix the violation, I assume.
Exactly. Country X then has a specific time frame to declare whether they accept the recommendations. If they reject them, they have the option to appeal the decision to the International Court of Justice.
Okay, let's say Country X goes completely rogue.
Okay.
They ignore the Commission of Inquiry, they ignore the International Court of Justice, and they refuse to reinstate the labor unions. What is the final step in the blueprints?
The ultimate final straw is Article 33. If a member state blatantly fails to carry out the recommendations of the Commission or the International Court of Justice, the governing body can recommend that the conference take action to secure compliance.
Action. That is a very broad, very serious diplomatic term.
Very.
It essentially means the organization can authorize the rest of the international community to take severe measures against the offending country, right?
Right. They can authorize economic pressure, trade restrictions, or diplomatic isolation until the labor violation is corrected.
It is the absolute teeth of the treaty.
Yeah, but it's incredibly rare that a dispute reaches Article 33 because the entire supervisory ladder is designed to apply escalating pressure, transparency, and mediation long before it gets to that point.
Makes sense.
The sheer threat of an international commission of inquiry arriving at their borders is usually enough to force a recalcitrant government to the negotiating table.
But the whole system relies on ensuring that the organization itself remains immune to the political pressures of the countries it is trying to regulate.
And that is the crucial final piece of the puzzle. Because how does an institution like this survive for over a century without being dismantled by angry governments?
Right.
The answer is in the legal armor they designed for it. The Constitution explicitly grants the organization full juridical personality.
Wait, juridical personality, you mean they legally classified the organization as its own independent entity? Almost giving it the legal rights of a person, so it couldn't be easily sued, dissolved, or bullied by individual member countries.
Exactly. It can enter into contracts, acquire property, and institute legal proceedings entirely on its own. Furthermore, the Constitution guarantees that the organization, its buildings, and its officials enjoy the privileges and immunities necessary for the independent exercise of their functions.
So a member state cannot, raid the offices of the ILO in Geneva or arrest an official to stop an investigation?
No, they can't. They built an impenetrable fortress of legal independence around this tripartite dialogue, ensuring that the pursuit of social justice couldn't be derailed by the shifting geopolitical winds of any single nation.
Wow. You know, when you look back at the entire journey of these documents, it really is a masterclass in institutional engineering.
It truly is.
From the ashes of World War I, they realized that moving armies and redrawn borders wasn't enough to secure peace. They built a robust, tripartite machinery that uniquely gives the people doing the work and the people running the businesses an equal seat at the table alongside world governments.
Yeah.
And they redefined the fundamental value of human effort with the 1944 Declaration of Philadelphia, explicitly rejecting the idea that human labor is just a commodity.
And then backed all of those high-minded ideals up with a relentless 18-month legislative clock and a sophisticated, multi-tiered enforcement ladder that holds sovereign nations accountable.
They designed a system to outlast the politicians who signed it, basically anchoring international diplomacy to the everyday reality of the workplace.
It built it to last.
They really did. And as we wrap up this deep dive into these century-old blueprints, I want to leave you with something to ponder on your own. We've spent a lot of time today talking about the historical context of, factories, assembly lines, the aftermath of world wars. But if the 1944 Declaration of Philadelphia explicitly states that labor is not a commodity, how do we apply that mandate to today's invisible digital algorithms and the modern gig economy? When your boss is literally an app on your phone, when your daily output is being quantified by lines of code rather than a foreman on a factory floor, how do we ensure that your spiritual and material well-being isn't reduced to just another data point? Do the foundational blueprints of 1919 hold the key to regulating the future of work? The muddy waters of modern labor might need this tripartite lens now more than ever. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep looking for the humanity inside the machinery.